This presentation on project management. Just to give you a little bit of background, I have a very long career that has involved project management back to the dawn of time. I'm pretty sure there were still dinosaurs roaming the earth when I learned how to manage projects. And I have done so at big companies, Cisco, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, things I haven't even put on the list here, which include spacecraft when I was at Lockheed Martin. So it's a huge subject. It's an area that I've taught at Stanford for the purpose of very specialized and cutting edge type project management activities that involve global teams and very complex projects. But for today's lessons, I am going to be focusing very, very tightly just on real estate agents and real estate teams. We're not going to go through, and I'm not going to give you a background of every concept there is in project management. I'm going to teach you today how you can actually do the projects, and a method that requires very little learning. You don't have to go buy an app. You don't have to pick one. You don't have to learn a new system. I'm going to be showing you how to do this with a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. So if you don't have one of those already, please grab one, because before we're done, I'm going to have each one of you walk through the steps and create your own project, probably a fairly simple one, but it'll be of your own choosing. So as one of my academic deans in undergraduate school said, he draws the line where the rubber hits the road. So theory is great, but unless it makes it to application, it's really pretty pointless. So without any further ado, let's get going. Okay, first, in order to be able to make something that is really spectacular, that meets all of your goals and is a project that you can be proud of when you put it together and extremely proud of when you complete it, you have to know what the end looks like from the beginning. So what results are you looking for that will create your successful project? Among those would include a project that is completed in a way that meets or exceeds the project goals. Okay, now we'll talk about project goals in a little bit, but at the end of the day, you've got to finish the whole project. What frequently happens is it gets partway done, or it didn't get done in a timely manner, and so it became of less use, and a lot of the value of the effort you put ends up being wasted. So the second part is just don't waste. You don't want to put together a project that wastes your time, creates a lot of overhead, doesn't get the job done. So we are going to be very tightly focused on productivity. This has to work so that it's better using this system than if you didn't. We also want to minimize friction in the work itself and between the contributors. So for those of us with an engineering background, the mechanical engineering principle is horsepower in minus friction equals horsepower out. That's why if you're a car aficionado and you've got a 740 horsepower engine up there in the engine bay, and when you measure the horsepower at the rear wheels, it's 560. Well, where did that 200 some odd horsepower go? It's called friction. It's what happens that saps the energy from its starting point to its conclusion. Now that is especially an important concept when we talk about work with individuals, how they're going to work together, what makes it easy for them to communicate and to collaborate, and what makes it difficult. Anything that makes it difficult is friction, and we drive it out of the system. The same thing is true of the contributors. You will have other people, processes, products that have to flow into your projects, and you want to make those so that there's as little friction as possible to get from their product into your timeline and your project so that it can be accomplished with a minimum amount of extra effort. The next thing is it has to be sustainable to be accomplished. So one of the main problems in making projects is, ironically, people are overly optimistic. So they think, okay, I've kind of looked at what I have to do. It's going to take 40 hours, so I can get it done this week. Really? Can you get it done this week? Are you going to do absolutely nothing else during the week? Oh, wait, yeah, I have to do my email. That takes a couple hours a day. Okay, so what you're saying is you don't have 40 hours to do this, you have 30 hours to do this. How about Wednesday? Oh yeah, I'm taking Wednesday off. Oh, well, there's another 8 hours out. Now that's 18 hours out of your project. So, and it goes like that, so that you have to be very careful to create sustainable accomplishment. Adding too many hours of what you have to do usually ends in failure. The next thing is to improve our skill set in estimating projects and organizing them for future projects. So estimating skills are something you learn and you build. It's very much a practice makes perfect type process. The skills themselves you'll get better at after you've done this for a period of time and used a reasonably static system so that you learn where the pieces are and how to manipulate the pieces. I can tell you that in the last 20 years, I have never been significantly late on huge global type projects. It can be done if you get good, if you practice and develop the skill that it takes to estimate how projects' resources will flow together and create the end result. Now, the last thing, and I put it in red, is really important. How do we drive consistent client experience? Whether they're sellers or buyers or home inspectors, we want everybody we touch to have an absolutely great experience. And to do that, you have to have consistency. It has to be the same great experience from Bill to Sally to Sam to termite inspection company to Wells Fargo loan agent. The experience of those individuals who receive the product of your projects needs to be consistently good. And one thing project management does is it drives consistency. Okay, projects for real estate agents and teams. There are two types of projects I'm going to concentrate on. One, I'm just going to call a sequenced list. It's a single person project generally. It's a listing project, meaning that it could be a listing. It could be an inspection project about how you're going to coordinate inspectors. It could be a customer care project about how are you going to take care of your customers, not only before a transaction, but after a transaction. What if there's problems? What are the systems to take care of that? Careful project management will help you create sequenced lists, and we're going to learn that skill right here, so that when you walk away, you can do this efficiently. The second part is a coordinated effort, a team project. This might be an example of review and scrub team contacts in your database. So those of you who are working actively to upgrade during this shelter-in-place period, your databases, this is a good example of a team project. You're going to, if you're on a team, probably split up the responsibilities and figure out who's going to do what when. Another example is a farming project, whether we're in the sheltering in place or we're outside the sheltering in place. Projects around farming of what are you going to do? What's the sequence? Who's going to do it? How do we make sure that people get a consistently great experience? These are all things that these types of projects drive. So the start, how do we get started with this? Well, the first thing is getting to a project goal. If you don't set a goal, you'll hit it every time. If you do set a goal and you're skilled, you'll learn to hit it more and more frequently. So to answer the questions, first we should start with, what will be different when I am finished with this project? Now this is really important. Some of this stuff seems kind of like, and it's a little weird. No, it's actually not. Nothing changes until something's different. What are you going to do in this project that will mean what you do now and what happens after the project are two different things? You've got to ask yourself that question. What's the value statement that drives the effort? You don't drive projects for project's sake. Nobody cares if you have a project. What they care about is what the project produces. That's the important part. So all through this process, I am teaching you the absolute minimum overhead activities it takes to get your job done effectively, consistently, and in an outstanding way. So how will this impact my real estate business? Wait a minute, I thought we were doing projects. Yeah. How does that impact your business? You gotta have an impact to your business, and it should make you more profitable. If you think about that up front before you start your projects, you will be selecting different projects with a different priority than if you weren't thinking that way. So think about your business. How does the project drive your business? Sometimes there's a real direct connection. Sometimes you have to think about it for a minute, like in the example I'm going to show you. Okay, what are the external drivers? Who needs this, when, and why? Those are external drivers. Who needs this, when, and why? What is going to be forcing this project into a position of priority right now versus at least a dozen other projects you could probably mention and write down if you were asked to do so. So what are the external drivers that are prioritizing? The next is, what is the cost? Now, back in the 1970s, when I was in college, okay, it was the late 70s, cost was defined by Paul A. Samuelson, who wrote pretty much all of the economic textbooks of the day in both basic and advanced formats. He always defined cost as an alternative for gone. What that means is the cost of doing this is that you're not doing these two things over here. So the alternative for gone cost of doing this activity is not doing either of these activities. So if this activity will give you $100,000 savings in the year, and these two activities together will give you $95,000 a year, then the cost of doing your $100,000 project to gain that much more business is $5,000, because you're not doing these two over here that you estimated at $95,000. So it's an important way to think when you're trying to prioritize projects and determine what the actual cost is of doing this project versus doing another project. Okay, so that's cost as an alternative for gone. Now, here's the way you write the goal. I put it in italics so that when you go back and review it, you should probably take a note on the side, put it in this format. The project will accomplish, and then there's a blank. The blank is what work you're going to do. Okay, that has an end result in something that's going to improve your business. Okay, it has to have an end result, and that's what you put down here in the first blank. Okay, the project will accomplish cost savings of $30,000 or more this quarter. Okay, that's a pretty good accomplishment. Do I want something down there that says, this project will accomplish an alphabetical listing of my contacts in my cell phone? What's the value in that? It's already there. But if you had to do something manually in that way, what's the impact? What does it actually accomplish for your business? So hone this down into something that really matters. The project produces an outcome so that, and then another blank, value can be delivered to my business. So figure it out. What is the value to our business? It's perfectly acceptable here to do a quick estimate of what kind of money does this save you or give you opportunity to capture that would otherwise not be there. So the project will accomplish this type of activity so that this value can be realized. That's the format you want to stop with. Now, pretty much any project, you can do this entire slide in 5 minutes or less. If you put your mind to it and don't listen to your IMs or all the dinging going on Slack, actually sequester yourself for 5 minutes and you can come up with these answers. Well, I don't know how to estimate value. Well, there's ways to do that. Your time is worth money. You take the amount of money you earn in a year, you divide it by the number of hours you figure you spent to capture that money, and that's your hourly rate. So every hour that you calculate out, and it's going to be different for every one of you, is worth that much dollar. Every time you go to a meeting, every time you create a project, that dollar figure should always be in the back of your mind. So what's in the back of my mind? $200 an hour, minimum. $200 an hour is pretty much a fully burdened labor rate for a mid-level engineer. I know that like the back of the hand because I've used something like that up and down for decades. You need to learn what that is for you. So I calculate out what my time is worth, and it's worth considerably more than that in my high-tech career. And that's what I used as a cost model for, do I want to go to this meeting or do I need to frame this project? Compare the costs. That's what you do in order to create value in the project. Okay, next piece. Start getting to a project goal. You have to answer the question. Let's see, we got that. Sorry, it didn't move. There we go. Scope. Now, this is the first of three very important concepts. Scope is all the activities that needs to be done to complete the project so that the goal can be realized. Scope is everything that you have to do that is part of the work. Success is defined by differentiate and articulate what is in scope and out of scope. You have to know both. Sometimes it's not enough to just put what you're gonna do. You have to also include what you're not going to do. So I'm gonna go back and I'm going to scrub my entire database. But am I transferring it to command in this project or not? And that makes a difference in the value statement and the ultimate goal of the project. It's things you have to think about in terms of scope. It includes your work and the work of others. So anybody who contributes to this project, small or large, is part of what they contribute is the scope. It's the what that is delivered. And then it has to be achievable. One of the big mistakes early on is you try to do too much. I'm sure some of you, like myself, may have experienced times in your life where you had to watch your weight. You know, up to 30 years old, I ran. My weight didn't change much from the time I was 18 to the time I was 30. Then all of a sudden, something happened, and I had to start watching weight. Well, when weight starts to get out of control, the best thing is not going to be, hey, I need to lose 50 pounds, and I'm going to do it in 3 weeks. That's a formula for failure. It's a huge goal. It's a project that's probably too big, and its scope is way too large. Maybe lose 3 pounds in the next 2 weeks. That's a great scope. Okay, the other thing is boiling oceans. We used to use that in high tech a lot. Projects became so large and inflated over time by scope creep, meaning that more and more things were added into the project that they became undoable. So you want to avoid both of those. Keep an achievable scope for the project that you're looking at. The next major component of a project is schedule. Schedule we're defining as a duration of time measured on a calendar end to end. Now, the calendar is an important part because you really want to know when you start and when you finish a project. And you need to know when certain things that have dependencies on them are done within the project so that it can complete on time. It includes more than just the scope of the work you perform. It must be time phased on a calendar. Why? Because some work's going to be done by others. Even if you're the only one on the project, there's probably other people doing things that feed into the project. And you need to keep track of that in terms of times and dates. You have to include anticipated wait times. If you're going to apply for your state California real estate license, you better, if you're working on a very tight time frame and you're thinking about quitting your job, you better include the part about how long you have to wait for the FBI to do the background check, because that's not something they tell you up front. Okay, another example is time allocated for unseen obstacles. I'm going to call that management reserve. Real important concept. When you start planning projects, your management reserve, meaning how much time you're going to add as a buffer or as a cushion, is going to probably be about 20%. the bigger the project and the earlier you are practicing project management, the larger that management reserve is going to be. As you get good at it, somewhere between 5 and 15% of your schedule should be the range that is predictable for completing the project. And it's important to get to a level of precision like that. And that only comes with practice. And then finally, schedule also includes dependencies in the work. Anytime you're waiting for another input or one thing has to be done sequentially before another, that's important to include in your project schedule. Then there's resources. Who will be doing the work on this project is the first thing you have to ask. Now, if it's just you, it's a single agent doing a project, no problem. It's a fairly short list. On the other hand, you may have some folks who are contributing to it, and you need to include their time in as a resource as well. How much time will be available each day on the project, or the average for the work week for the project itself? Okay, this is where you got to get real. You can't be optimistic or pessimistic. You need to be real. How much time do you actually have for this? So I have certain things in my schedule every day, part of my mini project plan that I have called my things to do list. And some of them are tough to get to. And it's just something I have to be aware of and build in every day. So if I overstuff my schedule and I slide off the calendar, guess what? Usually more than one thing slips. There's usually multiple things that don't get done because I'm not working in a sequenced fashion. Another thing is to take a close look at the calendar before you make assumptions about how much time people have available. Vacations, holidays, priority commitments to other things, training events for yourself and for others all take time out of that mythical 40-hour work week. So make sure that you take into account where these things occur and when they occur, when you have large dependencies outside of your own resources. So an example of that, anybody who's worked in high tech and has worked with contracting or firms in France knows that if you try to get anything done between June and August in France, good luck. It's probably not going to happen. And the reason is the French are smart. They go on vacations. They reduce their stress. They have laws. They have to have at least 6 weeks vacation paid a year. Everybody. So trying to get things done in the middle of summer in France is a tough call. Try to get anything done in Singapore during the Lunar New Year. That's also a very difficult thing to do. So be aware of holidays, of vacations, of the people and the resources that you're going to need, and try to estimate the amount of time that they have realistically when you add them into your project. So scope, schedule, and resources are the three parts of what has become to be known as the iron triangle. And this is a very basic in project management. Scope, schedule, and resource. Why do they call it an iron triangle? Real easy. It doesn't bend. There's almost nothing you can do once it's set up in a project to bend it. It's like iron. It's not flexible. And for projects to be successful, you have to accept the fact that the triangle relationship between scope, schedule, and resource are a very stiff relationship. Okay, so what else can you use this triangle for? Down, I put a tip at the bottom of the slide. It says, define any 2 points and you can estimate the third. What do I mean by that? Okay, if I know I have 3 months to do a project starting on day A, and it runs for 3 months and finishes on day Z. It's a 3-month project. That's my schedule. If I know my scope, I have to completely complete the renovation on a house before it can be sold. Okay, I've got 3 months to do it, and I know what the scope is for the renovation of the house. If I know those two, I can predict what resources are going to be needed. So if it's a major overhaul of the house, I'm looking at a contractor that has 2 full-time employees and plans to work on it at a 3-person level for 3 months to do a major overhaul. Probably is not going to work. So holding scope and schedule as constant, I can figure out what my resource is. Or, as another example, if I have my schedule and resource, I can drop out the scope. What does that mean? Okay, I've got 1 month to work on something. It's going to be this project. Resource, I've got myself at full-time and I have 2 associates at half-time. So I have 2-person equivalents that I have as resource. And then what can I tell if I know I have this much time and this much person power working on it? Then the part I can figure out then is what scope can I actually perform? I know my time. I know how much work I can apply. Now I can estimate what the scope is that I'm trying to accomplish. So anytime you hold 2 of these factors on the iron triangle constant, the third one can be estimated with a little practice very, very accurately. Okay, the next concept I want to hit on quickly is mapping dependencies. Dependencies are relationship between sequential events. So if we were in engineering, we would be calling this things that run in serial. A goes to B, B goes to C, C goes to D. It's not where A, B, C, and D can all proceed across time at the same time and in parallel. So these are serial events. So first you define what the first step is. Then you take a look, what's the second step? And how is it blocked until the first step is completed? Okay, so there's a relationship between step 1 and step 2, that 1 has to be done before 2 can be done. Then the next step, the third step, relies on the completion of the second step. What has to be done in that second step in order for the third step to begin? And so on and so forth. Sometimes you can have multiple steps converge on a single step so that maybe 4 things up here have to be completed before the next step can be done. So let's take a silly example. I need to go outside and commute to work, and I'm trusting someday that I'll be able to do that again. So what do I need to do? Well, there's brushing your teeth, there's shaving, at least partial, there's getting into my clean clothing, there's finding my car keys and my wallet, there's grabbing my backpack with my computer and all my stuff, grabbing a snack and heading out the door. So those things in that case don't have to be done in any particular sequence, but they do all have to be done before I head out the door. So that's where you can have multiple dependencies flowing to a single step that needs to be accomplished. So there's another concept in here that's good for you to know, although I'm not concerned that you know the term. It's called a critical path. A critical path means that through every project from start to finish, there are a set of dependencies end to end in a serial fashion that go from start to end. That critical path means that if you slip this step by 1 week, the delivery also slips by 1 week. You can't compress the time that is lost or the step that has not been achieved. So it means there's a 1-for-1 slip between missed milestones and missed deliveries. It's just a good concept to kind of have in the back of your mind when we're planning out a project. The next thing in the project is you always do a post-project assessment. Why? Because you need to get better at this. You don't get good at this in a week. You get really good with this after using it for several months. And what do you want to do for, how do we do a project assessment? Real easy. The more meaningful it is, the simpler it is. So what worked on your project? If it's by yourself, sit down, write a quick list of what worked. If you're a team, do this together as a team effort. Next thing is what didn't work? Where did it fall apart or run into problems? And how do you fix that in the next time you do a project? And then finally, an action item. And I'm going to ask you to underachieve minimally, and then you can go ahead and overachieve maximally. Take one action item at least, but take one and be sure that for your next project, that one action item to improve your project planning is accomplished from that point forward. Now, if you do that, chances are you're not going to make more than 2, 3, 4, 5 process mistakes in the project from the very first time you start. So that means within 5 iterations, you're going to have a very clean process in the way you do projects, and you're going to be practiced at it so that it becomes almost second nature. Okay, that is the concepts that we're going to be using for project management. Now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty and start getting ready to have you write your own project. So I'm only going to use 3 symbols for this. The large rectangle is a large observable piece of the work that has to be completed. I will also add that it's probably an intuitive step. It's not something you have to stop and think a lot about. It's just a big piece of something that has to be done in order to work on the project. Then I've got ovals. The oval denotes a small step contributing to one of the larger rectangular steps above it. And that's where you actually start thinking about it. The big square, the large observable piece, is something which, like I said, it's intuitive. You already kind of know what that's going to be. And you can list out several of those. But when you start breaking it down into what do I need to do to get this large observable piece done, then the ovals, you have to think about them. And you'll start adding them. And you won't get every one of them on the first pass through. You may have to stop and think about it for a little while. So you add those smaller steps in. And then we've got an arrow. And the arrow denotes only one thing, the flow of time. And so, as I said, when we started out, you have to put this on a calendar. It has to be timed from start to finish, not only for the amount of work, but for the start and stop to begin and complete the project. So, big observable things, smaller things that contribute to it, and arrows denoting the passage and direction of time. Okay, with that in mind, let's do an example. Okay, I've got a clean white sheet of paper, and my example is going to be baking bread. You say, well, Bob, what does this have to do with real estate? Let's see what my goal says. My goal is the project will increase the desirability of making my lunch and reduce my expenses by $300 a month. Nothing tastes as good as fresh baked bread, especially the particular kind I like. And if I bake my own bread at night when I'm not doing anything productive anyway, and it saves me from eating out. I don't know about you as real estate agents, but eating out has always been a pretty large piece of my expenses month to month. I can save $300. Okay, it's kind of a trivial example, but we want to keep it simple so you can learn this quickly. So we write the goal out. The next thing we do is we add the major pieces. So the first major thing I can think of is, well, I can't bake bread unless I've got an assembly of ingredients. Okay, great. Are there steps that go on above that, below that? Yeah, I think there are, but this is one big one and I can think of it intuitively. Okay, let's add some more pieces. I'm going right down the middle of my white sheet of paper, and I'm going to add, oh, well, if I have these ingredients assembled into a set on a table, then I need to mix them together to make my bread. Okay, that's pretty intuitive. It's a big piece of work. And then I've got to, well, let's see, once you assemble them and you mix the ingredients, you have to do something with it. And I'm going to, well, obviously, I'm going to have to bake it in an oven. So I'm going to have to bake my bread. So there's my 3 big intuitive steps that I can do right off the top of my head. Doesn't require a lot of thinking. And I know that each step is more involved than just what's written in the big step. Okay? So I'm going to assemble my ingredients, I'm going to mix the ingredients, and I'm going to bake my bread. Now, we're also going to draw a line from top to bottom, right down the middle of the page, and notice up at the top, I have it labeled time. That represents the passage of time between each of those major steps. Okay, once I've got that drawn in, Now I start figuring out what my smaller contributing steps are. So let's see, if I'm going to do this, there's a few things I have to do. One of them is I have to make a decision about whether I'm going to make this bread from scratch or buy a mix. And what else do I have to do? Well, I just kind of brainstorm. I'm just core dumping what I think has to be done. Somewhere I'm going to have to get a list of ingredients, and it's going to be necessary to assemble the ingredients. My larder is not that full, so I'm probably going to have to go to the grocery store and do some shopping. And yeah, those are the steps I can think of that need to go into assembling the ingredients. So when I'm putting those into those circles, those ovals, I'm not thinking about sequence necessarily. I'm just trying to get all the steps on the piece of paper. There's no order required. You put them down. And first you brain dump everything you can think of, and then we're going to sequence them. Okay, so in sequencing them, we're going to add some dependencies, and the dependencies or the sequence is going to be seen drawn into the timeline. So for this one, the scratch or mix decision needs to be made before I go to the grocery store or I assemble my ingredients, because that has to be determined first. So I drew a line from the scratch or mix decision to the very top of the timeline. That's where I start. And then I'm going to have another one about the ingredients on the left-hand side. That gets added in as the next step. And then shop for the ingredients gets added in as the third step. You can write things that are these smaller steps on both sides of the timeline. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the order because you're going to sequence them like this. Okay, then we take a look at the next major step. We need to assemble the ingredients. Okay, so if I assemble the ingredients, I add some more of the ovals. So reading instructions, get everything on the counter, find the measuring tools that I need, and I sequence those. And notice that a couple of these are upside down from each other. So I just drew on the right-hand side there lines that show where they actually fall in the sequence and in terms of dependencies. You have to find the measuring stuff before you can measure it and get everything on the counter and get it working. Now, I've got another one here where my thumb is on the left-hand side. It says consult expert. What if I run into trouble? Who am I going to call? My expert may be YouTube. It may be calling my mom and saying, Mom, I've forgotten, how do you cream butter and sugar together, and why do I do that again? I may need to consult an expert. But notice where I drew the line. I drew the line to the next major step, not up to the timeline. Now, why is that? Because that step, I don't know how many times I'm going to need it or where in the sequence of events I'm going to need it. So I just added, it has to be done before I go on to the next step. So instead of being on the timeline, it's just drawn to the next major step. And that way I know that any time along that timeline, I need to consult an expert, I can do so. So finally, you finish adding the smaller steps. So between the mixing ingredients and the baking of bread, we have to read instructions, combine everything in the correct order. We need to preheat the oven. We need to put the batter in the pan, and we have that consult an expert again. And again, I don't know where I'm going to need that. I got to find out from my sister whether or not can I use margarine to butter the bread pan, or does it have to be butter? Or can I use Crisco, or could I use olive oil? I don't know when I'm going to need that kind of help, but I can put that on the side, put it to the major activity, which is bake the bread, and that way I can easily figure out that anywhere on that timeline I can use it. So that's what the project looks like in its simplest form. You say, well, gee, Bob, mine's much bigger than this, and I've got a whole team. What do I do? Use a whiteboard. Whiteboards are fantastic for this. So it's a very simple way to not buy any software, not have to learn a bunch of jargon, but to create a sequenced list with dependencies from start to finish on a project. Now, there's an option here. If you're in a team or you've got part of these are not going to be done by you if it's a single person project, but there are contributors that are other than you, then you just add the names in. Put the name right with the smaller step, and that way you'll be able to map who is supposed to do what. You can also, as an option, add dates. So when is this thing due? Now, here's a little thing you should write down. Whenever you use dates on a project plan, it should be the completion date, not the start date. Why? Because start date doesn't mean anything. Let's see. I need to write my son a birthday card. So if my step is, I need to start writing my son a birthday card. When does that get finished? I don't know, because it only said I had to start it. But what about if I say mail son's birthday card on April 17th? Ah, now I have something that's really measurable and gives me data that I need. Okay, so for best practices, use a whiteboard, use digital imaging. So you say, well, how do I disseminate this information if we do it on the whiteboard? Real easy. Take a digital image with your cell phone and send it. It's the greatest thing, I think, invented in the 20th century is digital imaging on a cell phone. Never oversubscribe your time. We've already talked about that. Don't get optimistic about how much time you have, because you'll just get discouraged and not make it. Start off with small projects and drive your estimating skills. Remember, getting good at figuring out how long it'll take to do work and how much time is available to every person doing the work is a skill and an intuition that you have to develop. Then you test, revise, test, revise, test, revise, and your project intuition will get better. In other words, you keep doing projects, you test whether your theories and your methods and your intuition is right. As you get feedback where it's not right, you revise the way you do it and you try it again. Start a little slower to finish a lot faster. One of my clarinet tutors through college, Daryl Johnson, was in the Eastman Wind Ensemble, which, if you know music and especially classical music, that's a big deal. And he used to say this to me over and over: the greats do it slower, longer. You want to go really fast through a difficult project, practice it slower, longer, over and over at a slow speed, and then you can pick up the pace and get really fast at it. The same is true when you're trying to estimate and create reliable projects. Now, there are some fail boats in here. A fail boat is something, if you go that way, you're going to sink, like our boat there in the picture. Schedule compression. You can't cast blame on people late in the schedule. If A, B, and C work sequentially, A is late on delivering their project, B is late on delivering their part of the project, you can't blame C for delivering late, because all you're doing is compressing the schedule at the end and making it impossible for someone to succeed or for the project to be done correctly. There's no time to plan a project, just do it. Just do it, and I guarantee it'll be less efficient than if you spend a few minutes planning a project out. Don't be overly optimistic or pessimistic when it comes to SSR, which is scope, schedule, and resource. Be as absolutely realistic as you can be. Don't rely on late project descoping. Descoping means I'm going to say, well, I was going to try and get A, B, and C done, but in order to finish on time, I guess I can just get A and half of B. Your project failed if you have to do that. You need to learn how to plan so that what you start the project with, you finish completely on time. And that's the next one. The late project schedule slip is not a good thing. The other thing that's funny is late project slips, resources are never a solution. You can't add more people. I'm a huge equestrian fan. I used to ride hundreds of hours a month. And in horses, horses have a gestation period of 10 months. That's how long it takes to produce a baby horse. And if one mare can produce a horse in 10 months, can 10 mares produce a horse in 1 month? And the answer is no. They can't. So you have to realize that adding resources late in a schedule don't necessarily mean that you're going to get done faster. In fact, in many cases, it turns out the actual answer to this is it takes longer. So don't rely on just putting more people at the end of a project. And when you're good at this, 5 to 15% of scope, schedule, and resource uncertainties should be what you should target as your management reserve. Okay, let's plan a project together now. Let's turn on the chat. You guys can, if you've got a quiet background, feel free to turn on your microphones. We'll try to have a discussion. This is going to be difficult, be much better live, but we're going to see if we can struggle through. I'm going to go back to slide 12. I want you to take your paper and your writing utensil, and we're going to spend 15 minutes. It says 20 here, but we're going to try and get it in 15. We're going to start to finish a project, step by step, and you're going to follow my lead. I'm going to back up with you so that we can get through the project. Now, just a note here. How do I get more help down the line? Bob, this was great, but it was awfully fast. I'm running into some problems I can't think of. What should I do? Real easy. Send me an email. Call me. It's perfectly fine. I love this stuff. I breathe and live project management. It's been so much a part of my life for so many decades that I am happy to help you individually as an agent or as a team get set up and get running. No problem. Don't hesitate to ask. So without any further ado, I'm going back up to slide 12 here, and I'm going to have you start writing your project plan. So I want you to begin that right now. Doesn't have to be long and wordy. You need basically two things: what it is you're going to do and a quick estimate of what you think it's going to do to increase your business. I'm going to go to this mode because it's easier for me to see what's going on with chat. If I can find it. Olivia, can you see the chat?
Yep, I see the chat.
There we go. Okay,
Yep.
I've got to find it.
You'll want to exit share screen and then.
Well, I have to keep this up. So
okay.
I tell you what, you keep track of the chat.
Okay.
If you would for me, please.
Uh-huh.
And we'll walk through it. Okay, folks, as you get your first project started here with a goal written, hit your mute button so that Olivia can see you've got your goal written. Olivia, you tell me when we've got half or more with that written. Remember to keep it simple, 2 components, what it is you're going to do, and what value it delivers. Now, if you're working on it right now and there's dead air, feel free to ask a question if you're stuck.
Type in the chat when you're ready and you have your goal set. All right, Wilson said he's done. Melissa's done. Awesome. Maureen's done. Ashley's done. Susie's done. Awesome. So everyone's finishing up here.
Excellent. Let's do the second step. The second step is add your major pieces down the center line of your paper, not left or right margin. Go right down the middle and put your major steps. So that would be in this fashion until you end up with however many major steps you have down the middle of the page. So go ahead and work on that now and ping Olivia through chat as soon as you've got that. I can see chat now too, so that's good. And remember, if you have any questions, there's dead air. Feel free to ask. Remember, these are big pieces and they should be relatively intuitive. Shouldn't have to stop and think a whole lot about them. They're just the major steps. Okay, looks like Grace is done. Okay, Melissa, Philip, Susie, Alan, Ruben, Wilson. Okay, good. We'll consider that step done. Next thing, add your timeline down the middle like this. Nice straight arrow right down the middle of the page, top to bottom. That should only take a few seconds. Okay, and I won't have you signal on that one. I'm just going to assume you can draw pretty quickly. Okay, now let's work on the very top one you've got for your major step and start listing out in no particular order some of the steps that have to be done in order to get that big square one done. So when you think you've got those or you've got enough to understand the process, let me know. Okay,
right.
like we have several people done. Good, go on to the next step. So you're gonna move from this, which is having the steps there, and now you're gonna draw the sequence lines into the timeline. So figure out which one comes first, which one comes last, or which ones just need to be done and don't have a specific sequence, and those are the ones you draw straight into the big box instead of to the timeline. The timeline denotes sequence, dependency. Okay, let me know when you're done. Okay, now as you finish that up, go to the next set for however many you have and do exactly the same thing. So like the picture here, if you have any things that are not dependent, they just have to be done, you can draw them straight to the square like the one that I have my thumb pointing to. You guys can probably see my cursor now. Is that true, Olivia?
Move it around again. Sorry. Yeah, I could see it. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we could see it.
So for this one, you can draw these little bridges when you have to cross a line, especially if you have 2 or 3 of them that have to be crossed. It makes it a little easier to kind of optically tell what you're looking at. And you'll keep doing those until your project plan from start to finish is basically done. It shows the interrelationship of the smaller steps to the larger steps, and it shows their sequence in time along a timeline. Let me know when your project is more or less looks like this. It's fairly complete. Okay, are we good? Okay, for those of you who are finishing up, you all can have an option to add the names in or dates in, but I'm going to let you do that after the fact. So you can go back to your desks or to whatever you're doing right now, sheltered in place, and you can add the dates and times in if you think that's necessary. Now, one thing I would like you to do in this process is, having sequenced the large and small steps, go back through and figure out how many days are going to have to pass for each of those major blocks to be done. And to do that, you have to carefully consider all the things that I listed about holidays and vacations and the actual amount of time you have to spend in any given day or week. And you'll try to estimate what the total time is end to end from the date you start to the date you're complete. And that requires some substantive thought. It's not difficult. You just have to sit down and think it through. So we're not going to do that stage because it just takes time to do that. And it's best done when it's quiet and you're not being pressured. So any questions about the process of how we got from a project goal statement at the very beginning up here down to the completion of our basic project plan? Any questions? Is it fairly intuitive? Okie doke. Well, then I'll move on to the last slide. So in conclusion, there are all kinds of applications out there that you can do with project management. There's MS Project, Jira, Rally, project forecasting, Work Zone. There's hundreds more. These are very good for very complicated projects over long periods of time with lots of resources applied and lots of interdependencies. There's a thing called Agile and there's a thing called Waterfall. And if you ever get really interested in project management and you want to have that discussion with me, feel free. And I'm almost always available for lunches. Command has sequencing and distribution for campaigns. So be sure to take a look at that. And when you're looking at that, think in the project terms that we've been discussing and defining here today. Also, remember, it depends on the context of the project as to which one is best. So whether you're using Command or you're using my centerline basic project plan on a piece of paper or a whiteboard, you have to fit the tool to the job. Use the one that is the most applicable. So one is not necessarily better than another, but they are definitely adapted to certain types of things. And then finally, what I taught you today is free. This methodology doesn't cost you more than a piece of paper and a pen and some brain power. Stop and think, plan out your scope, schedule, and resource, sequence it properly, and you're on your way to success. So I want to thank you for your attention today. You've been really good to stay with me through this. I know we're moving pretty quickly. And I hope this helps you as you plan out your projects as an agent and as an agent team. And I want to re-extend again my invitation that any of you, please feel free to contact me. I'm more than happy to help you get set up and take your projects to the next level. So thank you all very much and have a wonderful, productive day. Bye-bye.